Hello and welcome to MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. My name is Dr. Alapasurlicker and I'm a psychiatry trainee in the west of Scotland. Like many of you, I spent a lot of time commuting. This was valuable time that I could have spent revising for the MRCPsych examination. And so, I've started this podcast to help you revise on the go. Each episode breaks down one high-yield topic mapped to the syllabus. This is then followed by 5 questions to help reinforce your learning. So, grab your headphones, turn travel time into revision time, and let's get started. In episode 31, we explored vulnerability, invulnerability, and type A behaviour. We examined why some individuals are more susceptible to stress-related illness than others. In this episode, we focus on a central question in stress research. What determines whether a situation is experienced as stressful? And what determines how effectively a person copes with it? The most influential answer to this question was provided by Richard Lazarus and Susan Folkman in their transactional model of stress and coping. Richard Lazarus was an American psychologist born in New York in 1922. He spent most of his career at the University of California, Berkeley, where he led a program of research that fundamentally challenged the stimulus-response view of stress. Lazarus argued that stress is not a property of the environment, nor is it simply a property of the individual. Rather, it emerges from the transaction between the two. What matters is not the objective characteristics of a stressor. What matters is how the individual appraises it relative to their own resources. Susan Folkman was his long-term collaborator. She actually began as Lazarus's PhD student at Berkeley. While they built the overarching model together, it was actually Folkman who first coined the exact terms problem-focused and emotion-focused coping in her doctoral thesis. Remember, Lazarus and Folkman's transactional model proposes that stress is not determined by the environment alone. It depends on how the individual appraises a situation relative to their own resources. When they finally pulled all of this research together into their definitive 1984 book, Stress, Appraisal and Coping, it completely revolutionised the field. It became one of the most cited works in the history of behavioural science, and in psychological circles, it is still lightheartedly referred to as the Bible of stress. At the heart of this incredibly influential model is the concept of cognitive appraisal. This is the process by which an individual evaluates the significance of a situation. At the heart of the model is the concept of cognitive appraisal. This is the process by which an individual evaluates the significance of a situation. Lazarus described 2 stages of appraisal. Primary appraisal is the initial evaluation of whether a situation is relevant to the individual's well-being. The individual asks, "Does this matter to me?" A situation may be appraised as irrelevant. In that case, no stress response is triggered. It may be appraised as benign, as a potential opportunity, or it may be appraised as stressful. Stressful appraisals can take 3 forms. Harm or loss refers to damage that has already occurred. Threat refers to anticipated future harm. Challenge refers to a demanding situation that is viewed as an opportunity for growth or mastery. Secondary appraisal follows a stressful primary appraisal. Here, the individual evaluates their resources and options for coping. The key question is, what can I do about this? Secondary appraisal involves assessing available coping strategies, social support, personal skills, and perceived control. Crucially, It is the balance between primary and secondary appraisal that determines the degree of stress experienced. If demands are perceived as exceeding resources, stress is high. If resources are perceived as adequate, stress is lower. Remember, primary appraisal evaluates whether a situation matters. Stressful appraisals are classified as harm, threat, or challenge. Secondary appraisal evaluates available coping resources. Stress results when demands are perceived to exceed resources. Once a situation has been appraised as stressful, the individual must cope. Lazarus and Folkman describe two broad categories of coping. Problem-focused coping aims to address the source of the stressor directly. The individual takes action to change the situation, gather information, make a plan, or seek practical help. Problem-focused coping is generally more effective when the stressor is perceived as controllable and changeable. Examples include revising for an examination, seeking medical advice, or renegotiating a workload. Emotion-focused coping aims to manage the emotional distress generated by the stressor. It does not address the source of the stressor directly. Strategies include seeking social support, reframing the situation cognitively, distraction, relaxation, or acceptance. Emotion-focused coping is often more appropriate when the stressor is uncontrollable or unchangeable, such as bereavement or serious illness. In these situations, attempting to control the uncontrollable generates further distress. It is important to note that neither category is inherently adaptive or maladaptive. The effectiveness of a coping strategy depends on its fit with the nature of the stressor. Maladaptive coping strategies include avoidance, denial, substance use, and rumination. These may reduce distress in the short term, but they maintain or worsen the underlying problem over time. Remember, problem-focused coping addresses the stressor directly, useful for controllable situations. Emotion-focused coping manages the emotional response, useful for uncontrollable stressors. The transactional model has direct clinical applications. In cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, the model underpins assessment of a patient's appraisals of threatening situations. Cognitive restructuring targets distorted primary appraisals, such as catastrophizing. It helps patients develop more accurate and balanced evaluations. Behavioral experiments and problem-solving skills training strengthen secondary appraisal. They do this by expanding perceived resources and coping options. Motivational interviewing helps clinicians understand why patients may be stuck. A patient who appraises change as threatening and their coping resources as inadequate will experience high stress around the prospect of behaviour change. Exploring and building secondary appraisal is central to building motivation. That means building the patient's confidence in their ability to cope with change. More broadly, the transactional model reinforces the importance of addressing both cognitive appraisals and coping resources. Remember, the transactional model underpins CBT through cognitive restructuring and coping skills training. It is also relevant to motivational interviewing. Building secondary appraisal, that is confidence in coping resources, supports behaviour change. Now, let's test your recall. I will read out 5 exam-style questions. After each one, I will pause for 10 seconds so you can attempt them before hearing the answer. Question 1. A patient is informed she has been made redundant. She immediately thinks, This is a disaster. I will never find another job, and I have no idea how to manage. Identify the primary and secondary appraisals in a response. Her primary appraisal is a harm and loss appraisal regarding the redundancy and a threat appraisal regarding the future. Her secondary appraisal is one of low perceived coping resources. Question 2. What distinguishes a challenge appraisal from a threat appraisal in primary appraisal? A challenge appraisal involves viewing the situation as an opportunity for growth or mastery. A threat appraisal focuses on anticipated harm or loss. Challenge appraisals are generally associated with more adaptive outcomes. Question 3. A patient with terminal cancer is receiving palliative care. He focuses on spending quality time with his family and finding meaning in his final months. What coping strategy is this? This is emotion-focused coping. Because the stressor is not controllable, emotion-focused coping is the more appropriate. Question 4. What is the key cognitive process that determines whether a situation produces a stress response? Cognitive appraisal. Question 5. Name 2 maladaptive coping strategies. Acceptable answers include avoidance, denial, substance use, or rumination. Let's summarise what we have learnt today. Lazarus and Folkman's transactional model proposes that stress results from the transaction between the individual and their environment. It depends specifically on the appraisal of demand relative to resources. Primary appraisal evaluates whether a situation is stressful, harm, threat, or challenge. Secondary appraisal evaluates available coping resources. Problem-focused coping addresses the stressor directly. Emotion-focused coping manages the emotional response. The transactional model underpins CBT and motivational interviewing. It reinforces the importance of addressing appraisals and coping resources alongside symptom management. In our next episode, we explore 2 further concepts that shape how individuals respond to stress. These are Rotter's locus of control and Seligman's learned helplessness. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. I hope this episode helped to move your revision forward. If you have any questions or just want to continue the discussion, you can find me on LinkedIn at MRCPsych on the Go, spelled MRCPysch on the go. This podcast is about making revision accessible. If you found it useful, liking and sharing it with others helps the goal more than anything else. That's it for today. I'm Dr. Alapasur, and as always, keep revising on the go.